Hi there. Good evening. My name is Ben Brower. I'm the Energy Bureau Chief at the Department of Environmental Quality, and I'd like to welcome you to the Montana Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Deployment Plan Update and Listening Session. We're co-hosting this webinar tonight with the Montana Department of Transportation. I'd like to note that we are recording the meeting. During this webinar, we'll be providing updates on Montana's management of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI program, and we'll welcome your comments and questions. Given the smaller group this evening, we had a big crowd yesterday afternoon for update. We'll go ahead and field questions as we can throughout the presentation. You'll have a couple of different presenters this evening. Feel free to drop questions into the Q&A box in the Zoom interface there. You are automatically muted at this time and will remain muted unless called on to speak. If you're on the phone, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6 and press *9 to raise your hand. If you have a question to ask verbally or a comment to provide verbally, then you can raise your hand through the Zoom interface as well. Joining me this evening to provide some opening remarks from MDT is Rob Stapley. He's the Division Administrator for MDT's Rail, Transit, and Planning Division. Go ahead, Rob.
Thanks, Ben. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of MDT and our partners at DEQ, I want to say thank you for your interest in taking the time to join us today to learn more about Montana's EV deployment plan. Excuse me. Through reauthorization of the federal transportation bill, the state is a lucky recipient of NEVI federal funding. Over the 5-year bill, MDT is scheduled to receive nearly $43 million to fund EV charging infrastructure along alternative fuel corridors. These are federal funds, meaning that there are strings attached to them. MDT's role will be to administer these funds in a way that will meet all federal requirements. DEQ will be developing a program to prioritize locations for chargers. We do not anticipate the stations to be in MDT's right-of-way, as federal statute prohibits the installation in interstate right-of-way. Tourism plays a big role in Montana's economy, and we can anticipate that tourists coming to our state will be driving EVs in increased numbers. This plan outlines how the state will prioritize EV charging infrastructure to support the national network. Thanks again, and we welcome your feedback and input on the plan as we move forward, implementing the NEVI program.
Thank you, Rob. I just add that DEQ has been coordinating closely with EV planning and infrastructure development, closely with MDT on EV planning and infrastructure development for more than 6 years, and we appreciate the partnership we've built with MDT and their staff. DEQ's primary role at this stage of the NEVI program is drafting annual updates to the deployment plan. Our work on EV planning is led by 2 of the state's leading experts on alternative fuels and electric vehicle infrastructure, Neil Ullman, who you're going to hear from this evening, as well as Kyla Mackey, who's the supervisor of the energy planning section of the Energy Bureau. We look forward to sharing our updates on EV infrastructure and welcome your input. To kick us off with our presentations this evening, you're going to hear from Ben Murphy, who's an electric vehicle planner in the Integrated Transportation and Publications section at MDT. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to give everybody some context for what we're talking about today and give you all some background information on the NEVI program. This program was established through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is also referred to as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and this was passed in November of 2021. The bill includes $7.5 billion for EV charging stations. $5 billion of this pot of money is for the NEVI formula program, and $2.5 billion is for the discretionary community/corridor grant program. Tonight, we're just going to talk about the NEVI formula program. If you have questions about the community and corridor grant program, we're happy to help assist you on those, but the main focus tonight is going to be the NEVI formula program. This program does require a 20% non-federal match, meaning that 80% of the monies come from the federal government, and the 20% that must be matched from the private entities. The purpose of this program is to support a convenient, affordable, reliable, and equitable national EV charging network. These funds are eligible for on FHWA designated alternative fuel corridors, which we will touch on in a few minutes. And the focus for Montana is on the interstate highway system and in underserved communities. Next slide, please. So what money are we going to receive? Well, Montana will receive approximately around 43 million over the 5 years of the NEVI program, which is fiscal year 2022 to 2026. To date, FHWA has appropriated funding for years 2022 through 2024, which is about 24.6 million. These funds are available until they are expended, meaning that they will not disappear or go away. We have them until we use them. In fiscal years 2025 and 2026 are contingent upon FHWA's approval of the annual update of the Montana NEVI plan.
Next up is Neil Ullman. Neil's an energy resource professional with the Energy Bureau at DEQ. Go ahead, Neil.
Thanks, Ben. The NEVI program, one of the requirements of it is that in anticipation of its creation through the bipartisan infrastructure law, state departments of transportation, Montana's case in collaboration with DEQ, established alternative fuel corridors. And in the years before the NEVI program was created, MDT and DEQ had designated with the Federal Highway Administration the 5 main highways you see here: Highway 2, Highway 93, I-15, I-90, and I-94. And so NEVI funds can be spent along those key corridors. There are other discretionary funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act that can spend funds along other highways that are not alternative fuel corridors, like that big gap in the middle called Central Montana. But for the NEVI funds, for the time being, we're focusing on these main alternative fuel corridors. Another one of this is also a big chunk of the requirements of the NEVI program, in addition to being within 1 travel mile of the exit off of those alternative fuel corridors. Now that's pretty easy for most communities along Highway 2 or Highway 93, where you just are driving through town anyway, and you just have to turn off into another street. But generally speaking, for the interstates, it's 1 travel mile from the end of your exit. So when you're getting off the interstate and you come to a stop, then it has to be within 1 mile of that stop, basically. Eventually, all these NEVI-funded charging locations need to be within 50 miles of each other in order to create this statewide and nationwide EV charging network. It'll take us several years to get there. Obviously, we're not going to do it all at once. The first round will focus on some of the larger gaps along our AFCs in the state, and then we'll eventually hone in on making those gaps smaller and smaller with future rounds of funding. These NEVI-funded chargers also need to be available 24/7, of course, in order to make sure that EV drivers, whether they're Montanans or folks out of state driving through, can make sure that they can charge up whenever they need to. These DC direct current fast chargers, DCFCs, need to provide at least 150 kilowatts of charge to a single vehicle. So if you pull up to one of the charging dispensers and you plug in, you need to be able to get at least 150 kilowatts. Now, not all vehicles can accept 150 kilowatts of charge, so they need to be able to receive the maximum that they can receive. Other vehicles, electric vehicles, can receive more than 150 kilowatts, so they need to be able to receive that maximum 150 kilowatts that the charger can provide. And then each of the dispensers that can provide 150 kilowatts of charge need to be able to do simultaneously to 4 vehicles at the same time. So basically, for a minimum eligible NEVI-funded location that has 4 150 kilowatt capacity chargers charging 4 vehicles at the same time, that small postage stamp of a parking lot, 4 parking spots or whatever, needs to have at least 600 kilowatts of electricity underneath it. So it's a lot of energy for a very small space, but that's already being done in many parts of Montana that I'll get to in a moment. Right now, for eligible costs, the charging dispensers need to have what's referred to as the CCS, or Combined Charging System plug. This is the type of plug that works on pretty much every non-Tesla vehicle. So Ford, Chevy, Volkswagen, Audi, etc. The Nissan Leaf accepts a different kind called the CHAdeMO, which I won't get into detail on. But right now, the eligibility requirements are that these NEVI-funded locations install a CCS plug. There is a request for information out from the Federal Highway Administration to find out whether or not the eligibility, project eligibility requirements should be changed to include what's being referred to as the North American Charging System, the NACS or J3400 plug, the Tesla-shaped plug, basically, that you'll see at Tesla superchargers across the state of Montana. Another requirement of NEVI-funded locations, they need to have at least a 97% uptime, meaning that EV drivers need to have near 100% certainty that when they pull in and plug in, that they're going to be able to use that charging system the way that it's supposed to be used. Then also, when those chargers go online and become operational, they need to be operated and maintained at that location for at least 5 years, so that we're creating this long-term, statewide, reliable network of EV charging across the state of Montana.
So as Neil was just speaking to, there are quite a few requirements of the NEVI program, and I'm just going to pretty briefly touch on some more of those. One of the requirements for the NEVI program is that the states must submit an annual deployment plan by August 1st. However, this year the deadline has been moved back to September 1st. MDT and DEQ are working collaboratively on that update as we speak. And the eligible projects and activities have been posted in the final minimum standards, which is linked at the bottom of the slide. The EVITP certification is a big one. That means that all electricians installing, operating, and maintaining EV chargers for the NEVI program must have an EVITP certification, which can be done online. You can also graduate from a continuing education certification or registered apprenticeship program for electricians, as long as one of the electricians working on the project does have an EVITP certification. There are data collection standards for the NEVI program. The quarterly ones will include topics such as charging session start times, the energy that was dispensed, the peak session power for each session, and the payment methods. And the annual data that will be collected is the maintenance and repair cost on an annual basis for each of those stations. The Justice 40 requirements must be met as well, and Justice 40 is a federal executive order that requires that 40% of the benefits of any federally funded project should flow to disadvantaged communities. There is a map of the Justice 40 communities on the Joint Office website, which we will have a link to later in the presentation. Montana does have disadvantaged communities in 21 different counties and also includes all 7 tribal reservations. The Build America, Buy America is also a federal executive order, and at this point in the game, the EV stations will basically need to be made in the United States.
Well, one of the requirements that we have on our side from MDT and DEQ's perspective is updating this Montana NEVI deployment plan on an annual basis. This will be the second time that we do our annual update. 2023 was our first annual update, and the initial plan was developed during the course of 2022. Prior to that, DEQ and MDT signed a memorandum of agreement on roles and responsibilities for how this program's going to work. MDT is going to be doing the lion's share of the work when it comes to making sure that these locations are built and constructed the way that they're supposed to be, according to the FHWA guidelines and regulations. And DEQ will be working throughout that process and using or lending our expertise, given the previous EV chargers that we've funded using other pots of money. Public engagement is a critical part of developing this plan, and we welcome the opportunity to meet one-on-one with you. We can either trade emails or phone calls or create our own Zoom or Teams meeting if you would like. So please feel free to reach out to us anytime. If you have follow-up questions after this webinar, our contact information will be at the end of this presentation. Also, if you want to submit public comments after you've had a chance to think about the information we're presenting today, we're accepting those through August 23rd. Our 2024 updated plan is due on September 1st. So that'll give us enough time to consider those public comments and incorporate them as relevant into the 2024 updated plan. The main focus of the plan is going to be where we are envisioning this project going. So right now we're prioritizing locations along some of the key interstates. We're looking to complement and not replace or supplant private investments in EV chargers. Best examples I can give are the newest Electrify America chargers that are in Glendive, Miles City, and about to be turned on here in Helena at Target. Those are more than NEVI compliant. At each of those locations, there are actually 6 chargers that can provide 350 kilowatts of charge to each vehicle. And we don't want to double up and invest the federal dollars where they're not needed for the time being. And instead, we're going to focus on filling the gaps in order to make sure that EV drivers don't have that range anxiety of getting from town to town, wherever it is that they're ultimately headed. We're going to be starting on filling gaps of 100 miles or more along those interstate routes. Again, eventually we'll get down closer and closer to that 50-mile goal of having these NEVI chargers no further than 50 miles apart. That'll take us a little while to get to. We're wanting to connect rural communities, and we were glad to hear when we first developed this plan that most rural communities across Montana, whether they're on the interstates, Highway 2, Highway 93, et cetera, can likely host one of these chargers. They have the electricity to be able to have the 600 kilowatts for the chargers, as well as make sure that the needs of local residents and businesses are met as well. So we're going to be focusing on drafting this updated plan for the next month and a half, and welcome any information that you have after this conversation tonight. Give you a sense of where we're looking and where the fast charging is right now. This is a map of the existing CCS charging locations. So this does not include Tesla superchargers, since most non-Teslas cannot use those superchargers right now, with the exception of Ford or Rivian EV owners. So you can see that they're mostly along the interstates with a couple of exceptions, and Seeley Lake and Gardner, those 2 locations were funded in part by DEQ and our portion of the Volkswagen Diesel Emission Settlement Funds, which I can answer questions about. Not all of these charging locations would meet the NEVI requirements. The ones in Gardner and Seeley that I mentioned are not 150 kilowatt chargers. There's only a single fast charging plug at each of those locations. But they do feel needs in order to connect, alternative fuel corridors. And right now, that trip across Montana, at least along I-90, is getting easier and easier to do. When we started this process about 4 years ago on the Volkswagen funding, there was only 3 CCS chargers in the whole state. They were in Missoula, Rocker, just outside of Butte, and then in Dell on Southern I-15. And eventually, they started spreading through private investments. A lot of auto dealerships are starting to invest in this now, that they're selling more electric vehicles. And then, of course, Electrify America has been expanding their network, where they started with those 3 in Missoula, Rocker, and Dell. They now have 7 in Bozeman, Glendive, Miles City, Billings, and soon to come in Helena. So that's the state where we're starting from right now, and we hope to be able to build upon that and make an even better network in the coming years.
So I'm going to speak to how we are soliciting applications for these NEVI locations. The solicitation will be going through alternative contracting at MDT, and will be for teams basically that include design firms, general contractors, site hosts, and owner operators, or really any combination of those. It will be a 2-phased process. The first phase being a request for qualifications. The proposing team will respond with a statement of qualifications, and these responses are going to be scored. This will result in a short list of 3 qualified teams. Then the second phase is the request for proposals. These 3 shortlisted teams will receive a RFP from MDT, and then they will respond to that with a technical proposal and a price proposal. These proposals are going to be scored with the best value method, which is based on the technical proposal and the price proposal. So upon selection, MDT will issue a notice to proceed to the successful team, which will then complete the design and the construction of the NEVI sites. The timeline of the first solicitation is fall of 2024, which is subject to change, of course. And the solicitation process is estimated to be about 8 months from advertisement to award. And the solicitation will be posted on MDT's alternative contracting website, which is linked below, and will also be linked to at the MDT's NEVI website. One way to form these teams to apply is through the Montana or MDT's NEVI partnering website, which is a web page for interested parties to facilitate partnerships for EV charging infrastructure projects. The results are posted on MDT's website and are updated weekly pending new submissions. And just a disclaimer, by submitting information to this website, you do agree to have your contact information and facility information posted publicly on MDT and DEQ's NEVI website, and to allow other interested entities to contact you directly. And that is also linked below.
The slides from this presentation are already posted on DEQ's Alternative Fuels and Transportation page. And when you bring up the PDF copy of these slides, you'll be able to click on these hyperlinks that we're showing you now. Again, the Alternative Fuels and Transportation page, which I'll drop into the Q&A here in just a moment. Also, the MDT NEVI site that Ben was just talking about, where you can sign up to get to be a project partner potentially, or just to check back and get more updates on the status of the NEVI project from MDT. There's also on the DEQ Alternative Fuels and Transportation page a link to a Montana electric vehicle infrastructure prioritization study, which we had just conveniently commissioned right around the time that the bipartisan infrastructure law became law. We had decided that it was going to be important for us to prepare for future investments, both public and private, on where EV charging systems should be installed across the state. And we're still using this study that was completed in 2022 to kind of inform the NEVI process and the location prioritization. So take a look at that prioritization study, because it's very much still relevant. And then the last link there, I think Ben mentioned earlier, is the link to the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. This is a joint venture between the U.S. Department of Energy and the Federal Highway Administration that was created by the bipartisan infrastructure law, so that those two entities could collaborate on getting this NEVI plan put together, the NEVI program, that is. And there's a lot of good technical assistance information on there. You can get information on what other states are up to, as well as other electric vehicle or zero emission vehicle work being done, not only through the DOE or FHWA, but there's also links to things that the EPA is doing and other federal agencies. So feel free to check that out when you pull up our website.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Ben. We're going to go ahead and switch gears into the Q&A session and open up the opportunity for folks to provide comments. If you'd like to or prefer to submit a comment or feedback for us by email, you can see the mtenergy@mt.gov email there. Please go ahead and submit your comments and suggestions before Friday, August 23rd, so that we can take them into consideration as we develop our update to the NEVI deployment plan. As Neil offered earlier, certainly willing to go into any degree of detail that you'd be interested in on this topic. Feel free to reach out to Neil at DEQ directly, or Ben at MDT directly as well. You can see their contact information posted. So for the Q&A session, there's a couple of options here. If you have questions, please drop them into the Q&A window, and we'll get to them sequentially. Or go ahead and raise your hand through the Zoom interface, and we'll call on folks in the order that they raise their hand to ask questions or provide comments verbally. If you're on the phone, don't think we've got anyone on the phone, but just to be sure, you can raise your hand by pressing *9, and then you'll need to press *6 to unmute yourself. We've got one question from Kyle to kick us off here. And Neil, I think this is a question for you. Kyle writes, I'd like to ask what happened to the chargers that were supposed to be installed at town pump locations. I'm a repair shop owner in Helena that inquired with DEQ about putting in a charger, was told town pump got the grant for funding to install the chargers. I own 2 EVs and town pump has yet to install chargers in Helena and Billings. The last I heard was town pump had a deadline of November in 23 to get these installed, yet failed to meet the deadline. Did the funding go back to DEQ? If not, does town pump have to still install the pumps? Neil, can you jump in there?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle, and thanks for tuning in. It's been a while since we talked about this. Unfortunately, the DEQ project that awarded funds directly to Northwestern Energy to install fast chargers and level 2 chargers at some town pump locations within their service territory, including Helena and Billings, ultimately ended up being terminated. Project is not moving forward as much as we would have liked to have seen it do so. You'd have to ask Northwestern Energy for their exact reasons why they decided not to move forward on it. None of the funds, and these were funds from the Volkswagen diesel emissions settlement, none of the funds were spent, so DEQ still has those funds. We're evaluating how to move forward on those. There's a number of options we're evaluating right now. Fortunately, and I can't remember how long it's been since we talked, Kyle, at the very least, fortunately, there's now multiple fast charging options in Billings. There was a point where I already mentioned that when I started with DEQ a few years ago, that there was only the 3 charging locations. So probably the furthest east fast charging location was Butte, which is not exactly eastern Montana. And then a couple of years later was Gardner, which again, same thing. But now we actually do have multiple fast charging locations, including the Electrify America location at Target in Billings, and soon the Target here in Helena. So that'll be a boost. And we're evaluating how to, again, complement the limited Volkswagen funds that we have to be able to create that statewide network. I don't think that right now Billings would be a target since there's a number of options right now, but certainly getting to Billings is a challenge. Places like Big Timber or Columbus, for example, would be key locations that were included in our prioritization study. So hopefully that answers your question there, Kyle. It is disappointing, and yeah, I agree with you that in another big gap that project would have filled was Great Falls. I drove there and back this weekend, and there's no fast charger up there. Fortunately, my car can make it, but I had a pretty low state of charge when I got back. So we're looking to fill those gaps with the NEVI funds and still working on the Volkswagen funds too.
Great. Thank you, Neil, for jumping in there. Question from Lauren. Lauren asked, do you anticipate additional requirements beyond NEVI minimum rules, such as canopies, pull-through lanes, battery storage, et cetera? Ben Murphy with MDT, could you jump in to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the question, Lauren. I would say we would anticipate that requirements like that will be, well, we can't require them, but we are creating the scoring criteria for these solicitations and would like to award additional points to those that would propose to have things such as canopies, pull-through lanes, battery storage, etc. That is not something we're necessarily looking at requiring, but that is something that we want to incentivize. And if the applicants are providing those options, we want to make sure that they score higher.
And Ben, could you say a little bit more about, just to clarify, these kinds of criteria, the scoring criteria, those will be published in the RFP, correct?
Correct. Yep. So when the RFP goes out, that's when we will be able to see what the scoring criteria is.
Great. Thanks, Ben. We've got a couple questions related to chargers that are in development. Neil, I'm going to pass this one to you. Question from Kyle. Do you know when Target's Electrify America charger will be available? I believe that's referring to the one in Helena that is under construction.
Yeah, and I'll answer Brett's at the same time. I don't know the answer, Kyle. It looks to me, in my highly scientific drive-by observations of Target, that it looks like construction is done. There is a meter there. The meter's been there for a couple of weeks, so there is electricity there, but I'm trying to learn more MDT and DEQ are trying to learn more about this process of when you do get to that state where you have a meter, there's electricity, what else needs to be done to turn on the on switch. With Electrify America, my guess is because they're a large national company, they're dealing with a number of things. They had a software issue that they had to reboot over the weekend. They also are still getting charging locations back online in the Houston area after Hurricane Beryl. So they might have bigger fish to fry than our charger in Helena. I don't know, but hopefully soon. They moved remarkably fast, in my opinion. They started construction in late April, and it took them less than 2 months to get everything installed. Brett, to your question, when we also funded the Northwestern project I was talking about earlier with Kyle, we also funded Flathead Electric Cooperative for 2 charging locations in their service territory, one at their main headquarters office in Kalispell, and then we also funded them for another location at the Libby Chamber of Commerce. That charger is online and operational. They've had a level 2 charger for a couple of years now, I believe, but now there's a fast charger that is working. You can find it on plugshare.com, which is where a lot of us EV drivers go to find the status of chargers across different networks. So that charger is online. It is only a 50 kilowatt charger. So if you're charging from 0 to 100, which you're probably never going to do, but if you were, it would take you probably over an hour to do that. But it is a good charger, and so far I've seen positive comments on it. You need the ZEF Energy app to use it, but I think you can also use a credit card too, according to PlugShare comments. In terms of NEVI funds, again, we're still working on the first round. We don't know when we're going to get to all the different parts of the state, depending on the priorities that we're going to be looking at. We did mention earlier that we're prioritizing interstate locations initially in this first round. We can't say which locations quite yet. So in all likelihood, a Libby NEVI location wouldn't be included in the first round, but there's still a lot of decisions to be made between now and when the RFP gets released. So more to come. Stay tuned to both the MDT and DEQ websites.
Great. Thank you, Neil. Another question from Lauren, again for Ben at MDT. On the slide that says tentative timeline for first solicitation fall 2024, is that timeline referring to the solicitation for the 3 selected applicants or the initial RFQ process? Ben, you want to jump in on this one?
Yep. So that's going to be for the initial RFQ process. We don't have our alternative contracting colleague online at the moment. He better fits to answer this, but I can't remember exactly how long the RFQ is open for. But yes, the fall 2024 date will be for the initial RFQ process, and however long that RFQ is up is evading me right now.
Thanks, Ben. Great. Thank you for all the questions. Again, feel free to hit the raise your hand button on the Zoom interface if you'd like to come unmuted and provide a comment or a question verbally.
While people are thinking about things, hopefully in the chat, attendees should be able to see the link I dropped to DEQ's Alternative Fuels and Transportation page. You may not be able to respond to that chat, but hopefully it showed up for you. Type a question if it didn't. But again, that includes the original version of the NEVI deployment plan from 2022, the first update from 23, the prioritization study from 22. Ben's sharing his screen showing what that website looks like. It also right now has the slide deck I mentioned from this presentation, as well as the recording from yesterday afternoon's webinar, which covered the same issues. You can also, on the lower right-hand side of the screen there, enter your email address so you can get updates on all the different clean transportation work that DEQ is doing through the NEVI program, through the Volkswagen funding and other pots of money that we've been working on over the years. So use this as a resource and check back for updates in the future.
Great. We'll put out one more call for questions here. Either type them into the Q&A board or raise your hand and we'll go from there.
You want to go back to our contact slide?
Great. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. I would note that if you're interested in more discussion on the NEVI program in Montana, as well as just generally the status of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, feel free to check out the recording from yesterday as well, or reach out to Ben or Neil directly. And then go ahead and send any additional comments you have to us here at the mtenergy@mt.gov email address. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your participation. Thanks for the questions and the comments this evening. Appreciate you joining us and providing your input. Have a good night.